So happy to have everyone join tonight. And we are up to 50 people joining us. So that is absolutely outstanding. My name is Mary Messerly, and I'd like to welcome you to February's branch meeting. Just a couple of real quick announcements because we have a jam-packed agenda tonight with certainly a lot of excitement. So we want to move forward into the agenda. But just a couple of things. The state convention, as you saw a couple of the slides, that's right around the corner. That's going to be April 22nd and 23rd. It's going to be free, it's going to be virtual, and I think it'll be a lot of fun. I personally have never attended a state convention, but I'm looking forward to attending the convention, and there will be more information around the corner in terms of what's going to be going on and specific speakers and things that you can participate and join in. Next, number 2, is the author's tea that was originally scheduled in May. That's going to be pushed out to October due to some continued health and safety issues. So that I want to make sure that everyone maintains a level of certainly safetiness. Even though we're starting to get our shots, we still need to maintain a certain level of vigilance about being safe. And then the last item is just a quick Zoom etiquette. As I think all of you are familiar with the chat feature. The chat feature is on the bar at the bottom of your screen. It's typically used to ask questions of our speaker. So after our speaker tonight, Marge Williams, is going to be fielding the questions. It would be good to simply preface your question by the word question, and that will make it a little bit easier for Marge to sort through the questions and to organize after our featured speaker tonight. You may also use the chat. Keep in mind, when you use the chat, typically it's going to everyone unless you isolate a particular person that you're sending it to. So whatever you want to share, all of us will be able to see your comments. We were going to have a very, very special guest tonight, Joan Snyder, our president of AAUW through the state of Wisconsin. It was just going to be a thrill to have her here. She had decided she wanted to join some of the branches, and she actually selected our branch to be one of the earlier ones to join our meeting tonight. And unfortunately, she was not feeling well. So we're going to give Joan a rain check, but I did want to say that she certainly sends her greetings and her thoughts, and she'll be joining us at a later time. So now let's kick off the list of announcements, of various announcements that we're going to be deep diving into. And I'm going to start off with Linda. Linda has some just awesome fundraising updates for us. So Linda, we're going to switch gears and it's all yours.
Okay, say everybody, thanks for coming. I think right now we have a total of still 50, pretty good number for a wintry day here in Wisconsin as we're tucked into our homes. I'm going to give an update on what the fundraising task force has done and then include a little preview of what you can expect. But before I get into the depth of that information, I want to share some very wonderful information to all of you and extend a great thanks to the AAUW Oconomowoc branch. In January, the co-presidents, Lynn Frank and Jackie Morgan, met to discuss what they were going to do with what was remaining in the branch funds. If you remember last year, Oconomowoc joined AAUW West Suburban. So their members are part of our group right now. What the co-presidents, Jackie and Lynn, decided to do was to generously give us all the monies in their remaining budget for our shares local scholarships fund. And this was $2,297 that are now ours for local scholarships. Oconomowoc's contribution, then when we write our scholarship monies for this upcoming spring, one of the scholarships then will be stated in honor of the AAUW Oconomowoc branch, because their $2,000 will fund one of our 5 scholarships. Oconomowoc's contribution, plus the $4,500, the donation of Jen Shower, and the monies raised from shares for the Ruth Bader Ginsburg fundraiser and the Cabby Style Show has enabled our current Shares Local Scholarship Fund to have about $10,000. So we are about 52% of the way to meet our financial commitments, and which now will take me to the update on the fundraising task force. It was decided last summer to create a task force to make some plans, since we are not able to use our regular fundraising venues, being the tea and the style show. So the task force that was formed this fall branched off from the work of the task force that was to make just recommendations this summer. So the fall's task force used the information that the summer group decided upon as just guidelines. And we have 14 members on this current task force. Our charge was to review the summer committee's information, recommendations. Becca?
Calls from Goins, Curtis.
Becca, that's Mary Goins, and I can't handle her right now.
Okay, I'll call her.
Okay, thanks a lot. I didn't know, bad timing. Sorry, folks. Disrupted the momentum here. So let me go. I'm sitting on my bowl. Okay, here we go. Let me get back to where I was here. Okay, the task force that we're on, that has 14 members, we met in December, January, and February. So we've been putting a lot of time. We've been meeting by Zoom. And our primary goal was to take the recommendations from this summer. How are we going to raise money to support the fundraising for 21-22? The good news is we can fulfill our commitments for this year. That's a total of $19,500. We have done that. We did it from last year's efforts, from the style show, remnants, and all the other things we did last year. So our fundraising now is for 21-22. And that's where we already have the $10,000. So what this group, our goal was to prioritizing some possibilities, create a final plan, and decide upon a theme. So what I'm going to share with you is the plan to give you a broader picture of how we're going to effort to make some continue our fundraising endeavors. First of all, please remember the current state is we can meet our responsibilities for this year. That's very important to remember. And the fundraising task force has developed a plan for the remainder of this year. So we've focused this plan around 3 strategies. The first one is a common fundraising effort. It's called a joint venture. So we have a joint venture, an arrangement with Shady Lane Greenhouse in Menominee Falls, and Heidi Hornig is one of our members. She has generously offered a payback every time a branch member, a family member, or a friend shops at Shady Lane and purchases regular priced merchandise. If you have Heidi come out and do some work at your home, like she does for me with my plantings, she will give back 25% of all regular price purchases. So that's a very positive thing for us to remember. And as you think about Easter lilies, spring planting, keep Shady Lane in mind. You have to mention you're from AAUW. And there will be a coupon and more information about this in the postgraduate. So one fundraising effort is a joint venture. The second fundraising effort is we're springboarding off of our shares fund, our shares campaign. So and more information will come in the postgraduate. But the Shares Pledge campaign is something that Kirsten and I are working on. And we are going to be requesting that some members, those who are interested, might be interested in committing an annual pledge to support our Shares Fund. An annual pledge of $100 or more. And that would be making a commitment that every year I will do this. That would help us in understanding how much money we may have coming into our shares fund. More information on this will be coming. And Linda, I'm in charge of it. I'm working with Kirsten and Becca. So it would be, we're calling it a pledge, a yearly pledge campaign. And I think some members hopefully would be interested in supporting this, knowing that all of our money supports our local girls, women, and women. Another shares off branch is a gifting program. Another possibility is when you're time to give a birthday gift and you don't want to buy another thing for someone, a friend, a relative, a family member, you might consider giving a gift in the name of that person. And we will have a certificate that will be sent to that person, knowing that for your birthday, blank amount of money was donated to our shares fund. And then we would explain what the shares fund is. That is Mary Meserly is going to be sharing more information on that and making better plans for you all to understand. And then the third thing, of course, is our shares donation campaign, as Jill Meyer has always so successfully run. So if you just, like, as usual, you know what, I think I can just write a check out for shares, knowing that the money again goes to our girls and women in the Milwaukee area. So I've talked about our joint ventures. I've talked about the shares campaign and its expansion. And then we're going to have a social gathering. Thank you to Linda Babcock and Carol Dadian. It is going to be called A Day in the Park. And it's also going to be tied with a pre-order flower sale from Shady Lane. You can mark your calendars for Saturday, May 22nd. And this is the weekend before Memorial Day. And oh geez, it's going to be at a park in Waukesha. And, you know, again, more information will be coming, but that'll be a fun opportunity, and we're going to make it COVID friendly. Another way to raise money would be called branch collaboration. And this is kind of like a little off in the distance, maybe for next year. Talk has been had of having a branch cookbook published, which would take our members to collaborate with providing the very best recipes. And that would be fall, next year, winter. And Carol Piliot is the person that would be springboarding off of that. More information will follow as we get more information about these ideas. Along the way, we will continue to invest in the future by having fun, adding color to our gardens and home, and getting together with our members in May. Thank you.
Linda, thank you. That was an outstanding report. Boy, you certainly, thank you for your leadership. Thank you for your coordination. Thank you for just reporting all of those things out. I'd like to give a personal shout out to Shady Lane, because I think that that's awesome as a small business to kind of step in and help us out in that capacity. So that is awesome. And then we also, Jill Meyer, I wanted to make sure everybody stays till the end of tonight, because we are going to have a share drawing that Jill will be coordinating tonight. So you certainly won't want to miss that. And the last thing, before we move on to our next speaker, I wanted to give another shout out, a shout out to Kathy Vandermark. This is her first meeting. She just joined yesterday. She had no idea that she was supposed to wear all these hats tonight. So welcome, Kathy, and we're so happy that you joined such a dynamic organization. So moving us forward, I'd like to ask Joanne Peterson to talk to us and give us an update about the READ program. Joanne?
Hi, ladies. How are you? It's great to see everybody. I'll just let that phone ring. I don't know who it is. This year was the first year that West Suburban Milwaukee decided to read a book in all the book clubs and to program some of our meetings around the themes in that book. We selected Small Great Things by Jodi Picoult. And we realized that all of the book clubs have included this book in their readings this year. But there's many of you out there who do not belong to a book club. So what we have decided is we want you to read the book. We want you to be able to get into a book discussion group. So what we are offering to you is to discuss the book in a Zoom meeting. We will have a leader, a facilitator for the book, so you just have to read and come. However, in order to figure out how many groups we need, we would like you to take the opportunity to sign up to come to one of these Zoom book discussions. So we will be having an article in the Postgraduate, and it will also be in an e-blast or email to you, as well as on our website. So if you are interested in reading the book, Great Small Things by Jodi Picoult, and would like to come to a book discussion, please sign up when you get this information that's coming up. And then we will offer 2, 3, however many people we get who are interested. We will then set up the group, the Zoom book discussion, for about 15 max in a group, 12 to 15, because that's a good number to have in a book discussion group. Also, I want to mention that our April speaker will also be discussing issues that come up in this book. So if we're trying to get them done before the April meeting, but also we thought we might have some after the April meeting, because when you hear her speak about these issues, you may have even more questions that you want to ask. So if you are not in a book discussion group and would like to join one of the Zoom discussion groups, please let us know so that we can include you in this and help with our planning. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Joanne. So the bottom line is to look for more information in the upcoming issue of the Postgraduate, certainly a vehicle of tremendous organization and communication for all of us. So thank you very much, Joanne, for giving us a heads up on that. So moving us forward, I'd like to ask Kirsten or Terry to call to give us an update on Out and About Inside. We've renamed that, Out and About Inside.
Yeah, I'm doing it.
Terry,
Kirsten and I are co-chairs. Yeah, I'm taking it tonight, and we share the duties, Kirsten and I, and we work very well together. So I get the opportunity to tell you that our virtual tour of the RBG exhibit is a big success, and we already have 45 people signed up and ready to go for the virtual tour on February 19. That's a week from Friday at 2 p.m. And those who recently sent me your checks, I'm going to send out an email acknowledging the receipt of those checks. And then I'm going to tell all of you, and I will do that in the email as well, that you will get the Zoom link for the tour on the 17th, which is 2 days before the tour. And I'm so looking forward to it, and I think you all are too. And if you have any concerns or questions, or if the Zoom thing is a problem, please get in touch with me, and I will indicate on my email to you my phone number, and so that we can resolve any issues. But I think it should go smoothly, and I know it's going to be well done, and we will learn about the life and times of Ruth Bader Ginsburg. The other item I need to mention is that Kirsten and I think Linda Palula put together this very interesting out and about inside virtual tour for March 31 at 6 p.m. And it's a wine and cheese makers class presented by the Village Cheese Shop. And on the day of the class, the people who participate will receive 5 samples of cheese and 5 samples of wine, and to be enjoyed during the talk. And all these samples were made by women. The cost is $35, but and you'll need more information, and that's going to be coming in there'll be a flyer in the next postgraduate, and then Punch Bowl will also send out an invitation. So this is something to keep an eye on and look for and remember or save the date on March 31, and it's the wine and cheese makers class. So we're busy trying to keep you entertained and enjoying good things. That's it.
Carrie, thank you so much. Who would have thought that you could have so many diverse activities in the middle of a pandemic? So we are certainly keeping our membership engaged. So thank you very much, Terry, for your leadership and sharing that those upcoming events. So moving forward, we have an update about the Mount Mary Jewel Scholarship Program from Dawn. Dawn, it's all yours.
Hi, everyone. I just wanted to make you aware that once again, Mount Mary has reached out on behalf of their Jewel Scholars Program, and they are looking for volunteers on April 8th from 8:30 in the morning to 9:50. And the event is going to be held virtually via Zoom, so it will be safe and you can participate from home or work if you can take a break to do so. The Jewel Scholars, if you're not familiar with it, is a National Science Foundation grant program which supports disadvantaged young women who are studying chemistry, biology, and food science. If you are able to volunteer, they ask that you provide feedback to these young women on their poster presentations. And the focus of their poster presentations this year is on hemoglobin research. So I am sure we're going to learn a lot as we listen and provide them feedback. But again, it will be, the notice will be also in the postgraduate. I'm going to ask that you let me know via email if you are interested and able to participate by March 26th. So again, it's April 8th in the morning, and details will be in the next postgraduate. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dawn. Thank you very much. I participated in this activity last year, and it was really, really exceptional to see these young women. They're really smart. They're super smart, and how they present, and those of us that would like to know a little bit more about hemoglobins, it's a great opportunity to participate in that event. So, and speaking of the postgraduate, I think every one of our updates have mentioned the postgraduates, and I just have to give a shout out to Janet and to Marty for their exceptional professional layout, organization, and distributing of the postgraduate. I mean, it's just chock full of excellent information, and I'm always so impressed of how it's crafted and it's sent out to our members. And so hats off and a shout out to Marty and to Janet for all the work and the investment of your time and energy in the postgraduate. So now moving us forward, we have the public policy update, and we're going to ask Marge to step up. And by the way, it was Marge's original idea that how fun it would be to perhaps have period pieces and dress in the suffrage spirit of the time. So thank you very much, Marge. This was a great success for all of us. So Marge, tell us about public policy, and I think that you have a very, very special activity for all of us too.
I do. Well, there's a whole lot of things going on in the area of public policy that once we get through our big celebration tonight, I've got a lot more to share for you in the upcoming months. But for tonight, we're so excited because the public policy team started planning this event like, I don't even know how many months ago. I remember sitting in Judy Ertel's living room in a big circle, and we were talking about having cake and all kinds of different games and activities. And well, the pandemic kind of interfered with all of that. And so we were put on hold a couple times, and now here we are finally to talk about the 19th Amendment and what wonderful changes that made for women and actually everybody across our country. So we are going to start out tonight with a little quiz to just see how familiar you are with the period of the 19th Amendment. So Carol is going to post some questions, and you guys are going to post some answers. So let's see how that goes. Okay, the first question. What does suffrage mean? The right to a fair trial, the right to own a business, the right to vote, freedom of religion, or all of the above? Go ahead and answer this question.
Marge, are we just to click on one of the letters?
Carol, I think so.
All right.
You know what? It's
Yes,
not,
yes.
yes, but you know what?
Yes.
It's not responding, so I'm not sure what's happened here.
Oh, wait, now.
Oh, there we go. Okay.
There it
so it's
is.
working.
Okay, it was just a
Yeah,
little
it
slow.
works. It works.
Okay, so 100% of people chose the right to vote, and that's actually the correct answer. And I wanted to just share with you a couple of interesting things about why it was so difficult for women to get the right to vote. According to Encyclopedia Britannica, there were several different reasons why it was so hard. One of them was women would neglect their home and family, causing society to unravel. And wouldn't that just be a shame? Also, another reason is that women's brains were inferior to men's, and so women were incapable of participating in politics. Oh my gosh. So it looks like answers are still coming in. So that was a little bit of a delay on that one, sorry. So the correct answer is C, the right to vote. So this word suffrage is specific to the right to vote. So that is the correct answer. Okay, so let's go on to number 2. Which state, and we need to scroll up so we can see all those choices. Keep going, keep going. Carol, can we see all of number 2? There should be up to E on there. Which state was the first to ratify the amendment giving women the right to vote? New York, Massachusetts, California, Wisconsin, or Wyoming? Oh, I guess I have to be the one to scroll. Hello. Ta-da.
I don't
Okay.
think so, Marge. This is really very clunky. So you
Well,
have
no,
to
I
correct
just
me.
used the scroll bar on the side.
Okay.
Yeah, and I was able to see all of the choices.
Okay, that's what it is.
Yeah,
Everybody
I
has
had
to
to use
scroll
its
on their
scroll bar.
own. Okay.
Takes a few minutes. You know how we are with this
Oh
technology.
yeah. Just
Yes. Okay, so we have 13% New York, 13 Massachusetts, 13 Wyoming. Nobody guessed California, and 63% guessed Wisconsin. Well, let me tell you a little bit about Wyoming. When Wyoming became a state in 1890, their state constitution was the very first one in the country to give women the right to vote. However, Wisconsin was the first state to ratify the 19th Amendment, the national amendment to the Constitution, and here's how they did it. One of the senators hopped on a train and took the paperwork directly to Washington, D.C. so he could beat out Illinois. So we became the first state to ratify the 19th Amendment.
Yes, yes.
All right, number 3. What amendment to the Constitution guaranteed women the right to vote?
21st.
And that's what we're celebrating tonight. It's the 19th Amendment. Now, this amendment gave women the right to vote, but not all women were able to vote until another act was passed many years later, and that was the Voting Rights Act in 1965, which just had a 50-year anniversary. And it prevented states from, basically that Voting Rights Act prevented states from putting any laws into place that would prevent eligible citizens from registering to vote or participating based on race or gender.
Yes.
So for Black women, for example, they didn't get to vote until 1965. So pretty shocking that it took all those years for that to happen. So, okay. How about this one? Which suffragist led the movement in Wisconsin?
Is there a hint who might be here tonight?
That person, well, she is, but she was accompanied by several other supporters as well. Theodora Winton Yeomans, Ludi Stearns, of course, Jessie Jack Hooper, our special guest tonight, and Ada James. So all of the above is the correct answer. All these women were suffragists in the movement in Wisconsin. Okay, question number 5. Which Wisconsin state senator, on behalf of his daughter, lobbied to authorize a state referendum on suffrage? All right, the correct answer is E, David James. And he's the person who traveled by train so that he could make sure that that 19th Amendment ratification for the state of Wisconsin made it to Washington, D.C. in plenty of time for us to be declared the first to ratify. Excuse me, little sneeze there. All right, our last question before we introduce our guest speaker tonight. Who was president when women gained the right to vote? And the answer is Woodrow Wilson, D. So during his second term before Congress in 1918, he finally publicly endorsed women's suffrage by the federal government. Prior to that, in his first term, he felt it was the responsibility of the states to make the decision. How many times have we heard that in recent years? But he finally, in his second term, because the women who are marching in the picture right behind me, drove him crazy at the White House with all of their picketing and their protesting and their support. So finally, during his second term in 1918, he agreed and actually stated before Congress that endorsing women's suffrage. And women were able to vote nationwide for the first time in a presidential election in 1920. And that is the last question.
Okay, Marge. Marge, anything else? You're good? Okay.
I'm good.
We can always count on Marge to have something very, very engaging, informative, and also educational, and of course, fun with all of our attire. Just as a reminder that if you would like to ask questions during our featured presentation tonight, please use the chat button, but preface it by using question so we can differentiate the questions from general comments. AAUW has a public policy priority that is aligned with tonight's featured speaker. Vigorous enforcement and full access to civic and constitutional rights, including affirmative action and expanding voting rights. I'd like to pass the baton to Linda to introduce tonight's featured speaker.
Okay. Good evening, everybody, and thank you for joining us for our February 2021 virtual branch meeting. Dr. Helen Bannon is our featured speaker. She has a PhD in American Studies and spent 32 years teaching history and directing women's study programs at 4 different state universities. Dr. Bannon has been a very active AAUW member for over 25 years. She is the former co-president of the Oshkosh branch and is currently a dual member of the Oshkosh and AAUW Milwaukee branch. When Dr. Bannon arrived in Oshkosh in 1998, a colleague in the history department introduced her to the legacy of Jessie Jack Hooper. She was an area Oshkosh native. She was a peace activist, a suffragist, and a supporter of Indian policy reform. As Dr. Bannon researched the life and the times of Jessie Jack Hooper, she became intrigued with this woman. Dr. Bannon took her first ever sabbatical to further research the accomplishments of Jessie Jack Hooper. When Dr. Bannon retired from Oshkosh, she continued to study Jessie Jack Hooper's life and eventually began portraying Jessie to various audiences throughout the state. It has been said that the third time is the charm. This is the third time that AAUW WSM has programmed our celebration of the 19th Amendment. Thank you, Dr. Bannon, for willingly rescheduling your presentation. You were originally scheduled in 2019, rescheduled for 2020, and here we are again in 2021. The time, however, is always right for us to acknowledge and honor the successes of those who came before us and influenced our history. We all appreciate the gifts women of courage and persistence have given us. It gives me great pleasure to introduce to our membership Dr. Helen Bannon, who will portray Jessie Jack Hooper. Thank you, Dr. Bannon.
I am so grateful to you for being so persistent in bringing me here to the 21st century through this wonderful modern invention of Zoom. I can be right in my own house. This is a stained glass window that's in the master bedroom of our house on Algoma Street in Oshkosh. And so I'm comfortable here at home, and you're comfortable in your homes as well. And we're speaking together. It's just so exciting. And I'm so delighted that I'll be able to tell you about my experiences in the suffrage movement. It was the first time in my life that I actually had the feeling that I was making history. It's a marvelous feeling. And I was just a part of a great mass of women. Organized womanhood had its wonderful success of working toward equality. And I was a part of that wonderful movement. And I'll try to share some of my own personal experiences. I won't tell you about the whole context of the suffrage movement, which was much wider than my little piece of it. But I want to give you a clear sense of what an ordinary woman like me experienced as a women's suffrage advocate. First, I'll start with my background. I was born actually in Iowa, and on a farm in Iowa in November of 1864. So I'm 156 years old this year, and I'm sure I'm the oldest person here. But I grew up on this farm. My parents had both been pioneers, essentially. As young adults, they came with their families from opposite ends of Pennsylvania to go to the Iowa frontier and get wonderful Iowa farmland. That's what they were seeking. And they settled in the northeast corner of Iowa, which was something of a real pioneering area. They met and married in Iowa. And shortly after my parents' marriage, my father, who was a farm laborer, was hurt in an accident and lost an arm. So that about killed his career as a farm laborer, but he changed to selling farm implements. And this was really a wonderful career in this time in the late 1800s, right after the Civil War. He was selling implements in a time when a lot of invention was going on in that field. And so he did very well until he had a business with a partner, and his partner absconded with the funds of the enterprise and disappeared. But my father felt that he needed to make good on all the debts that this guy had left him with. And so we had some tough times for a while, but the whole family pitched in. My mother was keeping the books for the operation, and she and my sister and I turned our large family home into a boarding house. And we had an unexpected consequence of that, in that my older sister Florence married one of the boarders, who was a lumber salesman come to New Hampton, Iowa. That was the town that we lived in. And he was selling lumber, but his family had a big lumber business in Oshkosh, which was noted for that. And so she married him and moved to Oshkosh. A year later or so, I went up to Oshkosh to visit her, and I went to a party and I met this really handsome, really nice young lawyer named Ben Hooper. And it was love at first sight for both of us. We were married in 1888, and I too moved to my husband's hometown, and we lived in Oshkosh. And then our parents followed us. They wanted to be near their daughters and their grandchildren. So the whole family had relocated to Oshkosh. And I had a really unique and early introduction to suffrage, different, I think, from anyone else that I ever heard of. My husband was a suffragist before I was. And shortly after we got married, we talked politics all the time. And he said to me, you know, it isn't fair that you're just as interested and just as knowledgeable about politics as I am, but only I can have my voice count. And so every other election, I want you to write out your ticket, and I will vote the people you want me to vote for, and on the issues how you want me to vote. And then on an opposite year, I will vote my own. And this got to be known. We started doing that right away in 1889, and we kept it up until we actually I had the right to vote. And people who were running for office in Oshkosh, if they saw me on the street in an election year, they would say, whose year is it, Jessie, yours or Ben's? But I was really grateful for Ben's benevolence, but it still didn't seem right that it wasn't an recognition that women were equal, and that all women should have the right, not be dependent on having a beneficent husband. Now, that was only one way that marriage helped me grow as a person. I had been a sickly child, and my parents didn't send me to school. They kept me home, and when times were good, I had a governess at times, but that was really awful. It was very isolating, and I was very unhappy with that. So I didn't learn a whole lot. And unlike all of you women in the AAUW, I did not have a good education. When I came to Oshkosh, I also was sort of overwhelmed by what a big town it seemed to be to me, from the little hamlet of New Hampton, Iowa. So then suggested I join women's clubs. And there was a new club, a department club called the 20th Century Club that was just starting out in the late 18. We kind of had a jump on the 20th centuries, founded it beforehand. And this club had departments that studied different areas, like there was literature and art and music and science. And over the years that I belonged to the club, I studied in all of them. So, and the way it worked, we would have a topic in the art club, and each woman would do some research and then present her research. Now, the first time it was my turn to do this, I was terrified. I felt my heart was so high in my throat, I was going to bite the top of it off. But I did it, and I did it again, and I developed my voice. I was known throughout my career as a suffragist and after as a good public speaker, and I had my start in the Women's Club. I also had an education in activism in the 20th Century Club, and there was the department that was called civics sometime and philanthropy other time that was focused on improving the community and particularly improving the lives of children in the community. I had a child, one daughter, Lorna, who was born a year and a day after our marriage. And she was the apple of my eye and it's the center of our lives. And I felt that all the children in Oshkosh should have the same advantages that we were able to give Lorna. So I worked with the civics department to help develop a kindergarten program in Oshkosh, free kindergarten in every school. We also developed skating rinks and playgrounds, and we hired a visiting nurse hired by the city who would visit the homes of the poorer people in town and be able to help with their health care. And I really, in all of these activities, I always believed men and women were equal, but I definitely understood that men and women had different sorts of lives. They were involved in different things in their lives, and this carried over to their politics. And that in politics, men thought most about money, and women thought first about people, particularly children. And I thought that it would be much better if the government included both the women's viewpoint and the men's viewpoint. Having just the men made it a lopsided government. And I thought it will be my purpose in life to try to bring about political equality for the people who bring all the people into the world. And I tried to do that with the suffrage movement. One of the projects that I worked on with the 20th Century Club was to build a sanatorium for tubercular patients in the Winnebago County where we lived. There, in the 19th century and early 20th century, tuberculosis was just a scourge, and it hit a lot of young adults and teenagers particularly hard. And we wanted to have a sanatorium close by. There was one only in the state of Wisconsin, one public one where people could go who didn't have a lot of money. So we wanted a county institution, but the state didn't have county institutions, county hospitals at that point. This was the first. And so I was on a county committee with 2 other women and a lot of men appointed by the county to work on this. And we women, of course, wrote the proposal. And when we went to the legislature to discuss it and lobby for it, we noticed that the men were the only ones that the legislatures were interested in talking to. They looked like straight over us to look toward the men. And I realized that the men were constituents because they could vote and we were not. And so in trying to do something legislatively in any kind of reform, we were handicapped. We were trying to dig a hole with a teaspoon when what you needed was a gigantic steam shovel. And so I decided I'm going to work for the vote first. And it just so happened, this was 1911. And in 1911, there was a proposal, as was mentioned in the quiz that we had right before my talk here. David James and his daughter, Ada, who were from the little town in southwestern Wisconsin called, it just popped through my head and left. I guess when you're 156 years old, your memory just doesn't always work. But anyway, David James was a state senator, and his late wife had founded a suffrage club in their hometown. And so Ada had grown up in suffrage. She was a young woman at the time, and she was very annoyed that when we were having the hearings on a bill that her father and she had crafted, and he was presenting to the legislature to establish a referendum so that the men of Wisconsin could vote on whether or not women would have the right to vote in Wisconsin. And Reverend Olympia Brown, who had been the Wisconsin Women's Suffrage Association president since the 1880s, was not present. She was wintering with her son in Washington, D.C. And Ada was the vice president of that organization, and she had clashed regularly with Mrs. Brown about Mrs. Brown's desire to have meetings in ladies' parlors and in churches. And we thought, in order for us to have this referendum succeed, we have to go and speak to the men where the men are. We have to be out on street corners. We have to be in public spaces, public squares. And so Ada wanted to start a new women's suffrage organization. And I was right with her. I thought this is really important. She called for a meeting in Milwaukee in April of 1911 to organize a new suffrage organization, the Political Equality League. And I and several of my friends came down from Oshkosh, and we were part of it right away. And we tried to do dramatic new ways of reaching the public. One of the things we used, motor cars were relatively new in 1911 and 12. And my sister had one. She had a really cool car with it was like a touring car. You could take the top off it and you could stand up in it. And so we borrowed Florence's car, and we drove all around the little towns surrounding Oshkosh and Fond du Lac in that section of the town, the state. And this was challenging in 1911 and 12 because the roads were terrible. And so several times we got stuck in mud. It was quite an adventure. But one time we had a different sort of adventure in Fond du Lac. We were speaking for suffrage. One of the women had a trumpet, and she would blow the trumpet, and that would gather a crowd. And then all of the people gathered, but one man had considerably more than he should have had to drink. And he was heckling us, and he came up to the car and ripped the Votes for Women sign that we had attached to the side of the car. And a cop came over and then pulled this guy up to the car and said, "Do you want us to arrest this jerk?" And we said, well, that might hurt his family, you know, but that banner cost us $2. So if he could make good on what we lost for that banner, that would be okay. So they gave us the $2, and we continued to have auto tours. We also, my father had a large motorboat, and right around Labor Day in 1912, before the election was going to be in November of 1912, the referendum, we went up the Wolf River, decorating my dad's boat with Votes for Women sign, as we had done my sister's car. And we'd stop at every public dock along the way, and I would speak for suffrage in English, and my friend Sophie Gooden would speak in German, because a lot of the rural area in that area was still German-speaking people. So we had fun with some of these activities, but it was also serious. We were trying to get the word out as many places as we could, and the Political Equality League really did reach out to everyone. In Milwaukee, we held big rallies at Serb Hall. We distributed suffrage literature that was printed in English as well as German, Italian, Yiddish, and Polish. And we also reached out to, we recruited a woman named Carrie Horton, Mrs. Carrie Horton, who lived in the Bronzeville section of Milwaukee. And she had been born in Louisiana and moved with her family to Colorado, which had suffrage even when it was, they put suffrage in their territorial constitution. So they've had suffrage since 1877. And when Carrie had graduated from high school and after she turned 21, she was voting in Colorado. And when she moved to Wisconsin, to Milwaukee, she was shocked. Here she was, she thought she had come to a progressive northern state and she was not allowed to vote. No women were allowed to vote. And she was shocked. So she was really eager to join the Political Equality League and to set up a little cell of a little subgroup of the Political Equality League in her community. And she recruited 50 members from Brownsville. And she also volunteered to go around the state when we had a caravan going to lots of different places. Wherever there was an African-American community, she would speak to the people there and say, this is for all of us and we need to be part of this movement. So we were delighted that Carrie Horton joined forces with us, and it really helped our movement. We worked hard and we had fun and we spoke to all sorts of people all over the state, but we lost by a 2-to-1 margin. We were really shocked by that. We thought we were going to do better than that. But we realized that what was against us was the Tavern League and the breweries and the liquor industry, because they feared that if women had the vote, they would vote in prohibition. Now, all of you know that prohibition was passed as the 18th Amendment. It was passed before women's suffrage, so they can't blame that on us. But that was what they feared. And the liquor industry had pushed the legislature to insist that each referendum be on a separate ballot from the regular ballot with the people who were running for office and any other issues. And so they printed the women's suffrage ballot just to, do you vote for women's suffrage, yes or no? And then they printed it on a special ballot. What color do you think they made the ballot? Pink. They made it pink. And so in every bar in town, there would be posters saying, vote no on the pink ballot. Big ads in the newspaper, vote no on the pink ballot. There were more pink ballots voted in that election than there were white ballots that covered everybody else, that all the other issues. So I think we were right to blame the liquor industry and Tavern League for that disgrace. We were very disappointed. And I personally had a hard time at this time. My mother had been injured the previous June when my daughter was graduating from University of Wisconsin at Madison. My mother fell and broke her hip. And she was failing ever afterwards. And by the weekend before the election would be held on Tuesday, she died. And so I had a very heavy heart to start with. And then my father, who had been very, very healthy, developed severe stomach pains. And we sent him, we took him, Florence and I both went with him to the Mayo Clinic. And he was operated on there, but he did not survive the operation and he died. So I was just floored. I had been very close to my parents, and to lose both of them in such a short time, as well at the time I was losing this focus for my life, I was really struggling. And so Ben suggested, my sister and her family regularly went to Texas in the winter. And they said, Ben said, go with Florence and her family to Texas, and that should help you calm down and you'll get your strength back. And I went to Texas, but when I started giving suffrage talks in Texas, I realized it was time to go home, that I had recovered enough. And so I came back, and we rejoined forces with Olympia Brown, and we kept the name, the Wisconsin Women's Suffrage Association, because that had been a long history with that name. But Olympia Brown stepped down as president, and we got a new president who was Theodora Winton Yeoman from Waukesha. And she had been a graduate of Carroll College. She was a newspaper woman, a journalist who started as a reporter, married the editor of the Waukesha Freedman, and became a columnist as well as an editor of that. She was also the president of the state Federation of Women's Clubs. And in that position, she had worked to make the legislature actualize a law that had been passed in the 1880s to give women school suffrage. They could only vote on school issues like a school board election or a state superintendent election. But they hadn't figured out procedures. How would women get to the polls? Where would they put their one issue ballot? So Theodora Yeoman helped push the legislature to do this. Now, my very first suffrage talk was in 1909, and I was encouraging women to use this newly regained vote and vote for school board to show that we needed and wanted the vote and would use it. And so I thought in some ways partial suffrage was like giving a kid a graham cracker at a banquet while the adults are eating really wonderful food. But on the other hand, I thought it was really important in principle that we show that we really wanted to vote. And so I pushed for that. And Mrs. Yeoman's and I got along very well. I was on her executive board in the WWSA for the rest of the duration in a lot of different capacities. I went to my first National American Women's Suffrage Association convention in 1914. And this one was in Nashville, and I heard Carrie Chapman Catt speak for the first time. Now, Carrie Chapman Catt was a very powerful speaker. She was born in and raised in, for the first part of her life, in Ripon, Wisconsin, but she moved to Iowa, and I was born in Iowa and I moved to Wisconsin. So we had something in common and connected in a very good way. But she was a mentor. She was my hero, my suffrage hero. And I was so impressed with her. And the next year, I went again to the and NORSA is how we abbreviated it. It's a long name. So NORSA convention, and Carrie Chapman Catt was running for president. And I was so thrilled when she was elected, because I thought, this is the leader who can bring us to suffrage success. Susan B. Anthony in the 19th century had said, failure is impossible. And we had tried so many different referendums in so many different states. And I thought failure may be pretty possible. But once Carrie Chapman Catt was in charge, I believed Susan B. Anthony, and I thought we would get there, because we had a new focus on this, what they called the Susan B. Anthony Amendment, what became the 19th Amendment, to give all the women in every state the right to vote at the same time, rather than going state by state by state. That state by state approach, almost all of the states before 1915 that had women's suffrage were to the west of the Mississippi. There was something in the air of the West that breeded more respect for women and a sense of equality. Maybe it was that there were fewer women in the pioneer days. I'm not sure. But anyway, it was definitely true. And we needed to bring the whole country to suffrage together. And Mrs. Catt really pushed for that. Now, Susan B. Anthony had proposed and written the original wording for this 19th Amendment, but it had not come to a vote in Congress until 1915. And that was the first time it came up to the House. And we in that election, it lost by a landslide, and the Wisconsin delegation, there we had 11 congressmen at that point, and 9 of the 11 voted against women's suffrage, and they used the referendum results as their rationale. They said, my constituents are against it. They, you know, look at how the referendum went. So that was very discouraging. But we were just sure that we were going to keep trying. And in 1916 was a presidential election year, and we thought we will have suffrage marches at both of the conventions, the Democratic and Republican conventions, to show the masses of women who want the vote. We wanted that the political parties to make women's suffrage one of the planks in their platform. And we went, since the Republicans were meeting in Chicago, and since Chicago was so much closer to Wisconsin, I think the Democrats were in St. Louis that year, but we had a big Wisconsin delegation marching in Chicago, and we had these cute little yellow tunics to put over our lovely white dresses. And they were kind of a cheap fabric, but we had written Wisconsin votes for women on them, and we were very excited about this. And we were lining up. My daughter Lorna and 2 of my nieces were there, and my friends from Oshkosh. We were all excited to be in Chicago. But as we were lining up, these huge thunderstorm clouds started gathering, as they do sometimes in June. And as we started walking, the sky opened and it poured. And we were marching for several blocks. The firemen were supposed to have a parade that day, and they canceled their parade, but we kept walking. And by the time we got to the hall where the convention was being held, we were totally drenched. And our little tunics were shedding yellow dye down our lovely white dresses, and our hair and our hats. Everything was just soaked. And as we entered the hall, some guy on the stage was saying, "Women don't want the vote." And then we came in trying to stand straight and tall and proud, in spite of how wet we were, but looking like we had gone through the deluge. And I heard men speaking in the crowd saying, "Look at those women. They must really want it. They wouldn't do that. My wife wouldn't do that." So I think we made some headway with the rank and file of the Republican Party at that. We didn't get the plank at that point, but we did make a point, I think, in that. Now, that was 1916. Later in 1916, we had a NORSA convention in Atlantic City, and we invited President Wilson, who was running for re-election. He was the Democrat. He was running for re-election in 1916. On the his slogan was, "He kept us out of war." The World War, the Great War, had started in Europe in 1914. There was a lot of pressure for the United States to enter the war. And I and most of the people in the NORSA were not in favor of the U.S. going to war. So we liked Wilson's stance in that. And we were hoping if he came to our convention that he would lean more towards suffrage. It didn't quite work out that way, but he did listen to us, and we thought he was moving, even glacially slow, but he was moving in that direction, and we felt good about that. And while we were there, I was appointed the Wisconsin chair of congressional work for the suffrage amendment. And so I went down after that to Washington, D.C., and I was trained to be a lobbyist in Washington to work with particularly with the Wisconsin delegation, to get to know them, to get to know what kind of arguments might be useful against them if they had a daughter or a sister or someone who was pro-suffrage. And so I was doing lobbying. I had been chair since 1915. I had been working on lobbying in the Wisconsin legislature to try to be a woman's voice. And I first was trying to get them to pass another referendum, and that failed, but we wanted to pass other laws that women were interested in. We wanted them to consider outlawing child labor, for instance, or to raise the age of consent from 12 for girls, which it was at the time. So I liked lobbying, and I was good at it. I liked people, and I liked talking to people. So I enjoyed my lobbying experiences. And we also, as part of the lobbying, one thing that Carrie Chapman Catt brought to NORSA was a sense of getting strategy. Now, while we thought in 1916 that Wilson would keep us out of war, by February of 1917, the war clouds were gathering the way the thunder clouds had gathered in Chicago. And we realized that there were forces pushing the United States into the war, and we wanted to have a strategy. What would the NORSA organization do? Would we support the war, or would we and just work for the war, or would we continue to work for suffrage, or one or the other, or both? In the Civil War, the Susan B. Anthony and Lucy Stone, that generation, decided that they would not work for suffrage during the Civil War. They would just put their efforts into supporting the war. And they felt that really damaged their cause. So we didn't want to go that route. The National Women's Party was the much more extreme branch of suffrage, and they did not want to have anything to do with the war. They blamed President Wilson for leading us to war. They said once we did get to war, they were very critical of Wilson. So they didn't want to have anything to do with the war. They blamed the party in power for not giving women's suffrage. So they had a totally different stance. What NORSA did was we said, we'll do both. We would continue to work for suffrage, and we would work to help in the war effort. So in World War I, in the Great War, as we called it then, I was rolling bandages with the Red Cross. I was touring around the state, talking about food conservation, telling women how to grow gardens and have meatless Mondays and wheatless Wednesdays so we could send more food to our boys fighting in France. We really worked hard to support the war as well as working for suffrage. And we did that. And in 1917, I did some lobbying in DC because the women's suffrage amendment was going to be coming up again to the House in 1918, January of 1918. And so I had lobbied with our delegation when I was in DC, but after that, Mrs. Catt pulled me aside and she said, you know, we've done a canvass. We're 2 votes shy in the House. And there are 2 Wisconsin legislators, House congressmen, who are leaning towards suffrage but have not declared for it yet. And they're in your district. One is your very own district in the 6th district in Oshkosh and Neenah. The other is in Appleton and Green Bay, not far from your house. So I want you to go back to Wisconsin, get off the train at every stop where and try to find the most important men in each town you visit and get them to send a telegram to their congresspeople saying, I support women's studies and women's suffrage, and I want you to vote for it. So I did that for 10 days. And this is January in Wisconsin. And so I'm getting off the train, sometimes walking through snow up to my knees, going to office buildings and city halls and churches, trying to get the most powerful leaders to send in their telegrams. And the night before the vote was to be the next day, I came home and just collapsed. Ben, I think, helped carry me upstairs to go. I just was totally exhausted. And he woke me up the next day and said, it won. It passed the House. Suffrage passed the House by 1 vote, and both your guys voted for suffrage. So I felt that all of that tremendous effort was worth it. I couldn't really celebrate, but I smiled and I felt really thrilled. And that was the first time I had felt that my own personal efforts had made a difference. But in the end, it didn't really make a difference because the Senate voted the amendment down the next month. But we still were making progress. We weren't going back to where we had been. And in the 1918 delegation, 8 out of the 11 people voted for, it was congressmen in Wisconsin voted for suffrage, as compared to 9-2 against only 3 years earlier. So that gives you a sense of how much change we had made in the public opinion about suffrage. Now, in 1918, while I was doing these talks about food conservation, I would speak to the suffragists in these towns afterwards and say, make sure you try to get people elected to the legislature this year who are really pro-suffrage, because we're going to have a chance, I think, to ratify the 19th Amendment. It's coming soon. I can taste it. So when I was still doing the chief lobbying in the Wisconsin legislature, when I met the legislatures in January of 1919, it was the best pro-suffrage legislature that I had ever seen. And one of their first acts was to send a message to the U.S. Senate saying, we want you to pass that 19th Amendment. They also voted that the state law saying that women would have the chance to vote for the electors who voted for president. So even if the amendment had not passed, women in Wisconsin would have been able to vote for president in 1920. But as it turned out, that law was superfluous. We didn't need it. Mrs. Catt called Mrs. Yeoman and me down to Washington in May to lobby in Congress for the amendment. And she also wanted us to be there to be able to cheer when the amendment passed, because she was pretty sure it was going to pass this time. But I said no. It was the only time in my life that I said no to Mrs. Catt, because I wanted to be in Wisconsin and I wanted to get that legislature to ratify first. And you know from the quiz that we did ratify it first. And it was the efforts of, I was there, so was David James, who had sponsored the original referendum in 1911, his daughter Ava. Now, Ada James was in the more radical wing of the National Women's Party by this time, but she and I collaborated beautifully. We got her father appointed a special courier and he had the ratification papers when the governor's ink was still wet on the paper, I think. And we got him on a express train to Washington, D.C., had explicit directions to get to the Secretary of State's office, and he got our paperwork in before Illinois. And so we were the first to ratify. There had to be 35 more states, because we needed 3/4 of the states to ratify for it to become the law. But in August of 1920, we had ratified in June of 1919. But in August of 1920, Tennessee became the last state to ratify. And that was another cliffhanger. Ratification went through by 1 vote there. And a young man, a rookie congressman who had a white flower in his lapel, meaning he was anti-suffrage, had gotten a letter from his mother. He was 23 years old, and his mother said, be a good boy and vote for suffrage. And he did. And he told people that his mother told him to do it, and he did it. And so Tennessee became the 36th state, and we had the 19th Amendment was added to the Constitution. And it was a wonderful feeling of success to, after all that work and all the hard times and hard struggle, to finally have met a goal. It's a wonderful feeling though. And I am glad to have been able to share my personal experiences with you. And I hope that you will remember them and vote in every election that you possibly can, because we worked very hard for you to be able to do that. Thank you very much. I've enjoyed talking to you.
Jessie, AKA Helen, thank you so much. What a wonderful, wonderful historical journey that you just took us on. It was just amazing. I do see that we have some questions coming in, and so I'm going to ask Marge to field some questions, if you wouldn't mind just being on standby. And
If
just
you want Jessie to answer or Helen, let me know.
okay, yeah, we will differentiate. But
Okay.
most of them are for Jessie, I might say.
Good.
And just as an FYI, at the conclusion of our questions and answers for Jessie, Jill Meyer will be doing the shares drawing. So you certainly want to stick around for that. We have 51. We had a high of 55 people at tonight's meeting. So that's very impressive, Jessie. You draw a big crowd, I might say. You draw a big crowd. So Marge, would you please field some questions to Jessie?
Sure. Well, the first question that came through had to do with how you got involved in the suffrage movement, but you elaborated quite a bit on that as you presented your story. But I guess just to tag on to that a little bit, as a young woman, was there any inspiration or something that triggered your initial interest in the movement?
Well, I saw Susan B. Anthony speak at the Columbian Exposition in Chicago in 1893. And that was my first time to actually hear a suffrage leader speak. And by this time, Susan B. Anthony was quite elderly, but she was still so regal and powerful. So that was an important experience for me. But I think that I really came to suffrage from my work in women's clubs, from being frustrated by not being listened to when we would try to get some things through the legislature. So many of us in my generation we were middle-aged at the time of the last push for suffrage, and we had been active in club work and in reform work and felt that we really needed the vote as a tool. And so that was the propelling force.
You're an inspiration for our group because there are a lot of issues in the state that we want to get working on, and the public policy committee is going to be working with me on some important stuff. So, okay. So what do you think you would say? What message do you have today about how far women have come? What do you feel has been like the biggest change, or how women have come from that time in the early 1900s?
Oh, well, I think women have come so far. When I come back like this, I always try to see something of who's in Congress. After suffrage, the suffrage movement won, I was the first state president for the League of Women Voters. And in that position, it's a nonpartisan position, but I had leaned Democratic because I was a Wilson fan. That's what really brought me to the Democratic Party. Anyway, I was asked by the Democrats to run for U.S. Senate in 1922. So I actually ran for U.S. Senate in 1922. And I lost by a landslide. I think it was something like 3/4 of the votes were in against me, because I was running against Fighting Bob La Follette, who was like the biggest political star that Wisconsin has ever had. So I knew I was a sacrificial lamb, but I really wanted to bring women's voice to Congress. That quote that I mentioned in my talk about how women and men have different priorities in government. I really believe, and I really wanted to have women's voice. I thought particularly in international affairs, women don't want to see their sons go to war, and I think they would fight more for that. So that was why I wanted to do that. And so when I see a picture, when I know that I ran for U.S. Senate in 1922. I think Tammy Baldwin was the first woman from Wisconsin to be elected a U.S. Senator. And that was in, I think, the 1990s. Was that when she was first elected? But, you know, it took a long time. But now when you see Congress, the House of Representatives, there's so many women and so many people of different backgrounds. And it's really inspiring to me when I come back and see through my zoomy eyes what's going on.
Awesome. So when you traveled around the state doing your lobbying, somebody was asking, did your sister Florence, right? Is that her name?
Yes.
Did she accompany you on those trips too? Was she as involved as you were?
No, she was not involved. And actually, I didn't mention that in 1915, when a lot of other things were going on, my sister died very young in 1915. And so her husband had died previous to that. So I talk about my going to things with my nieces because I tried to be as much of a mother to them. They were young women by that time. But I tried to care for them as much as I could. And a couple of them moved to California. So we had a lot of cross-country train trips to visit and keep the family together. But I often went with other suffrage people to women's clubs and other functions through the rest of my life. The friends I made through women's suffrage remain my allies and friends for the rest of my life. And it was really, you really form strong bonds fighting for a cause. They talk about war buddies. Well, we were suffrage buddies.
Thank you. Do you have any grandchildren or great-grandchildren that are still living in Wisconsin?
No, I had one daughter and she had two children. And her children, Lorna's grandchildren, as far as I know, live, there's a daughter in North Carolina and a son in California and another daughter in Montana, I believe. So they're spread throughout the country. And I've corresponded with one of the, with a grandson who lives in California, and he was very excited to learn more about his great-grandmother because his daughter had a class project that she was supposed to write about an important woman in history, and she was able to write about her great-great-grandmother. I sent a lot of material his way for that, and I hope to get the book finished one of these years. Okay,
that was another question. Somebody was asking if you have written a book.
Not yet. It's on its way, and I like doing the talks about Jessie because I think it brings more awareness. And if I ever get it finished, people will have heard of her and they'll buy my book.
Awesome. So I guess you're going to be meeting up with Carrie Chapman Catt at the state convention.
Yes, at the Wisconsin AAUW convention. Carrie and I are getting together to talk about old times and talk to each other and to the group about our work together for suffrage. So that will be really fun. I'm looking forward to that.
Awesome. Those of us that attend the convention will look forward to that as well. So how about what was going on in Europe? Did women have the right to vote in Europe at the time you were working suffrage in the US?
Not really. I think the first nation in the world to offer women's suffrage was New Zealand, and that was in the late 1800s. The British suffragists started about about the time that we did, but they got suffrage a little bit later. Some places in Europe, Switzerland didn't get women's suffrage until the 1970s, if you can believe it. You know, so it really varied very much by country. But Carrie Chapman Catt was very involved with trying to develop an international women's suffrage organization. So she was more focused on that international outreach. That wasn't my my phase of my real interest, but
Yeah, you had plenty of work to do here.
yeah, I focused more at the home front, and I lived my whole life in Oshkosh after I moved there after I married. And when I died, my obituary was in the New York Times because I had done a lot of different work. But that was probably because Carrie Chapman Catt knew somebody at the Times and she liked me because it was an unusual thing to have that happen.
So how are we doing on time, Mary?
I think we have enough time for one or two more questions and then
Okay.
we'll probably carry on.
Okay, let me ask this one. Linda wanted to know, why did Black women not have the right to vote when white women did?
Well, it depended on where they lived, and the Jim Crow laws started right after about the 1870s, and the South, each of the southern states had its own pile of laws that kept Black people from voting. Some were poll taxes that were ridiculously expensive. The kinds of tests that no PhD could answer the questions that they asked for the prospective Black voters, whereas the white voters had a much easier test that they could take in order to pass, to become voters. So somebody like Carrie Horton had voted. You know, she was in Colorado, which had women's suffrage early. And so Black women there could vote, and in northern places could vote. But the South particularly had such a strong Jim Crow system that prevented people from registering to vote and from voting. So it took the Civil Rights Act to get away with that, but they're still trying to limit votes by people of color.
Yep, and we're still experiencing that, which is just
Sad.
incredibly sad that there's still such a long way to go. Well, thank you for answering all those questions. I think we've all been really inspired tonight.
I enjoyed speaking with you. I wish I could have seen you all in bigger pictures. I have little teeny, but it helps at least that I know that there are people there, so that helps.
Well, Marge, thank you so much. You did an outstanding job fielding the questions and tracking them for Jessie. And Jessie, thank you. It was just an absolute delight to go on this historical adventure for you to share with all of us. Thank you. And we certainly look forward to seeing you at the upcoming state convention.
Yes, I'm looking forward to it a lot.
It'll just be in a couple of short months, and it'll be delightful. It'll be delightful. Okay, I would like to ask Jill Meyer, for our shares coordinator. She has a special drawing. So Jill, if you're ready for the drawing, I think we're all excited.
Yeah, and so I know Linda gave a wonderful update on where all of our shares are this season. So I only see those that are coming through our traditional method here, and thank you. I think even since the start of the new year, we've gotten some very generous checks that have come through, and so do keep those coming, because as an individual that works full-time in higher ed, I see the impact that this pandemic, and now we're getting into a year of this pandemic, and the impact that it's having specifically on women that are trying to attend college. So our impact is going to mean even so much more next year and the years to come. So I always like to thank you, and I love my role as the shares chair for that very reason. So we have two wonderful items that we are drawing for. So first of all, our wonderful member, Carol Surgis, made us, I'm sorry, I got my background here, RBG necklace that is just absolutely stunning, and donated for our drawing here in February. And today's drawing is for all those donations that came in before December 31st. So we had 32 members donate at that point. And then the second item we're going to be drawing for is a wonderful, everybody needs this right now, cape, a black and white cape. So we got two great items here. I went ahead, I ran my random number generator here in the background, and we have two winners. So our winner of our necklace is Lynn Sigler.
Well,
and congratulations, Lynn. And then our winner for our cape is Ellen Dagan.
excellent.
So that's-
Congratulations, congratulations. Those are wonderful gifts. You know, and Jill, I got to give you a shout out too of all of the work that you have done, you know, to launch shares, to cultivate shares, and just to keep encouraging to invest in the future and women's education. You know, it's about our future, and you have really, really done such a stunning job in terms of leading that effort. So thank you. Thank you. And being in higher education is all the more important. Thank you for the drawing. Congratulations. We'll be sending those prizes out shortly. And now I think that concludes tonight's branch meeting.